It's really lovely to be here. One of the things that we always say to students when they're doing more formal presentational talk, when we're training them in Oracy, is not to undermine yourself before you start, because we all have a tendency as humans to go, I'm really sorry, I'm a bit late today, so I'm not quite prepared, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to break all my rules that I would say to them. So I was just explaining, until October, I was the CEO of Voice 21, having started it up 8 years ago. I stepped down, and I'm currently acting as an advisor and doing some work around Oracy policy, but it means I haven't been out and about and on the road and doing the talks in the way that I used to do almost every week. So I feel scarily out of practice, which I was kind of all right to cope with until I spotted Mick Waters in the back of the room, who was one of my favourite people to hear and listen to anytime. So that threw me. So I will try and stay on topic. And also today's really interesting because I was saying over lunch, this isn't an Oracy conference. It's not even a literacy conference. It's a conference about professional development and so much more. And so I'm going to try and hopefully talk to you a lot about Oracy, because that's my passion, and that's why I'm here, and hopefully you'll take something from that, but also kind of where I think it sits as much as I can in that kind of wider professional development space. And when we started Voice 21 up 8 years ago, we thought really carefully about what kind of organisation we wanted to be and where that sat within what we know is the amazing professional skills of teachers. And we wanted to be a contributor as an organisation to the development of teachers' professional expertise and their ownership of their classroom and their curriculum, not an organisation that took away from that. And I think too often people work in the education space, when we, particularly in sort of developing something not new, because Oracy's been around forever, but something which we're looking to have great emphasis. The risk is that we come in with all the shiny new things, and we're like, this is the way it has to be done. It has to be done exactly like this, and the way that you're going to do it really well is to pay £499 a year and to follow our programme exactly in these ways. And that certainly wasn't our thinking at Voice 21. And I started the organisation, we always had we've succeeded when we're not needed mantra. It was about how can we unleash the talents that are in our schools anyway. How can we make the most of the skill and the practices already happening in every classroom around Oracy and really amplify that, which is why I use the word amplify, rather than trying to impose something new or different on schools. So hopefully that aligns with a lot of the conversations that you've been having today around really starting where teachers are at and thinking about how can we maximise that. So I just wanted to, at the beginning, to sort of pose a question. What's a conversation in your classrooms, in your school, perhaps also in your staff rooms, more importantly, potentially for the conversations we're having today? What is the conversation like? What's happening? Are children able to disagree agreeably? Are they able to do they ask each other questions? Are they curious about what other people in their class think about an idea? Do they build on each other's ideas, or do they hold on tightly to their own thoughts and want to use it kind of competitively to get one over on each other? Do they think and talk like historians or like mathematicians? Do they want to share their views? Do they feel that their voice is valued, that other people will listen to them in their classroom? And do you feel like that in the staff room? Do you think there's a conversation around professional practice happening in your staff room? Do people talk about what's been said in the lessons? Do people feel that they are engaged in a wider discussion about what your school is and what it wants to be? Oracy to me is really about what that conversation that's happening day to day. It's a lifeblood of a school. It's not just about something which is controlled and talked about in lesson time, but it's something which permeates every aspect of your school day. And done well, and hopefully we can talk about some of the ways of doing that, it can be something which can really help to shift that conversation, not just, as I say, between student to student, but also teacher to teacher, teacher to student, and at a leadership level. So a little test, because I've got the after lunch slot, which means that I know you're all sleepy and require a little bit of waking up. Can anybody? Well, actually, I'm going to say one of the techniques that we often use is I bet you're thinking. I'm sure it's something you're all familiar with. There's a way, so we might give students a picture, and they have to discuss between themselves. I bet you're thinking. I bet you're thinking is a nice opening, a nice scaffold, because it enables them to say things that perhaps they don't need to take too much ownership of, so they don't feel embarrassed. They can say, I bet you're thinking. They can say something quite wild if they want to, and that's okay. So I want you to turn to the person next to you, a bit of think pressure. I want you to turn to the person next to you. I'm going to put it back and say, I'm using the frame, I bet you're thinking, where do you think this is from? So have a little read. Who do you think might have said this, and in what context? So give you a minute, and then turn to your partner, and with the starting of, I bet you're thinking. While you're, got to give people a chance to read it. You know. It's a bit of a long quote, but I liked it all, so I couldn't cut it down. Okay, so if you're ready, bit of a bet you're thinking.
Without realising
Okay. Yep. Okay, does anybody want to tell me what they were thinking or what their partner was thinking? Anybody?
We said it was political.
Said it political, yep. Yep. Anyone sort of hazarded context or when it might be from? You think you know it?
Somebody can be boss knows.
No, I don't know.
You think you might know. Go on.
Well, the thing is, I've got a feeling it's a trap.
Okay.
Go on, you tell me where you
I
think.
think it's Keir Starmer.
That's really interesting. You're totally wrong.
Oh.
But really, really interesting because it could have very much been written this year. You know,
Yeah,
so
that's
Keir
right.
Starmer did a big speech this year on the importance of Oracy, well, last year. And it could have very much been written, but actually it was from the Bullock report in 1975. I can see some cheers at the back where people have got it right. So it's actually 50 years old, nearly coming up 50 years old next year, that quote. It was the report was commissioned, I think, under the then Education Secretary Margaret Thatcher, this report is well worth a read on so many levels. It's my go-to on so many things, but it's a little bit shocking in the world of Oracy that 50 years on, really, that is as relevant now as it was then in terms of the importance. So there seems to be a need for us to change the conversation at a national level about the importance and the value that we put on spoken language. So can we really say that it's a priority objective for all of our schools, that commitment to speech needs of their pupils? Is that true now? And I think it's fair to say that the conversation is starting to change. You talked about just then the speech that was given last year. We're hearing more and more. I'm sure you in your schools are talking more and more about Oracy and the importance of it and its value. And we've seen from all parties, and including in the very recent initial teacher training and early career framework that came up, a greater emphasis on Oracy. Now, I could do a whole session on what we would have liked to have seen and what wasn't included and what was not quite right. But there was an emphasis and a recognition of the importance of Oracy that hadn't been included in the last framework, and it's coming through. We're also seeing it coming out much more in inspection reports from Ofsted, so again a recognition. So feels like the conversation is starting to change, and that's important. That's important to us at Voice 21, obviously, because that's what we were set up to do, to try and change. But it's important because of that really fundamental role of Oracy in every aspect of learning and life in school, and the opportunity and the untapped opportunity and potential of Oracy to really start to shift things within our school that have felt quite intransigent, things that have been really long-term persistent problems. That Oracy has a part in it. It's not a silver bullet like any of these things. I'm not going to pretend that by introducing and embedding Oracy more, you're going to change every aspect, but it really has got potential to sort of shift things. So why should you bother then? If we want to change that conversation, why should you bother teaching Oracy? I'm sure many of you will have gone through these discussions before, but all of the evidence shows that Oracy increases student confidence, increases their confidence with their learning as well as their expressive confidence. It improves academic outcomes. So if you go and have a look at the EEF toolkit, you will see that Oracy currently is up there at joint second in terms of the most effective interventions. It's also very cheap, which also it helps it get up there. But language is very, unlocks everything in school. We know that the impact of Oracy doesn't just sit in those subjects which we kind of traditionally think of as language-rich subjects. It is true in maths and science as it is in English and history. And I'll go into that a bit in a moment. But we're looking at, in terms of the toolkit sort of estimates, it's about 5 months additional progress, and that's particularly true for students from under-resourced, underserved backgrounds. Fosters wellbeing. This is a huge challenge, isn't it, in all of our schools at the moment, that mental health crisis that we're feeling in terms of students. But it's not just a case of, fostering wellbeing for those students who have specific needs and whose voice perhaps they don't feel like they've had a voice in school, or they find they struggle to articulate their emotions to be able to share effectively the way that they're feeling. It's really about how you can create a sense that people's voice has value, and the belonging and the sense of wellbeing that can bring to a school environment. And we've got loads of case studies of schools who've seen really big shifts in that sense of belonging for students, and what that then enables in terms of students' confidence and then their academic ability as well. Helps students to thrive in life beyond school. I think that's always been the case. Oracy's been, one of those gatekeeper things that, if you're going to get onto higher level professions, for example, you at some point you will be facing interviews. There will be a time that young people are kind of put on the spot, and being able to have that high stakes situation not be the first time that they've had to face those things is really important. But actually, even more fundamentally than that, I think now, when we look at the change in our economy and the change in what's going to matter in the global marketplace in the future, it is those human, social, emotional skills that, like Oracy, that are going to have the value, because those are the things that can't be automated. Those are the things that we can continually bring and have and be able to put ourselves out there. So we should be really investing in those things. We should be investing in those skills which will protect our children and young people from the market in the future, and enable them to thrive and create a competitive advantage, that around that, and really thinking about how they can be the best at interacting, they can be the best at having empathy, and all of those aspects, as well as being able to get the job interview and get through. As we talked about earlier, very much the sort of focus behind Voice 21, we work with schools in the 40% most deprived schools in the country. In terms of free school meals, our focus is around the role of Oracy in helping to narrow gaps and to promote social mobility or social equity. This is, my Neil Mercer, who anyone who's interested in Oracy obviously needs to spend a lot of time with. You are on your second chance for some children to have a rich language experience. If these children are not getting it at school, they're not getting it. And so this is the challenge that we face, to make sure that our classrooms and our corridors are as language rich as possible, to create that opportunity for young people to be immersed in that and to develop the skills to be able to navigate language in a way that enables them to be adaptable, enables them to have that wide and versatile ability. So that's all great, and I'm sure you're all sold on the importance of Oracy. You've turned up today, you haven't sneaked off for the afternoon to go and do some shopping, so I'll trust you in that. But Oracy's not easy to embed, and that might be part of the reason why we can look back 50 years to Bullock and go, actually, it hasn't never quite, it's had its moments. It had the great Oracy project, the National Oracy project. It's had moments, but it's never quite got itself in there in a way that hasn't been allowed to slip, hasn't been allowed to be undervalued or overlooked again. And I think there are some real challenges around Oracy, and there's reasons why it sometimes feels like it's always sort of slightly the Cinderella part of, again, so when you look at reading and writing or literacy and maths and numeracy, why Oracy kind of always sort of like slips off the end. And I thought this was really relevant when thinking about professional development, and how do you, if you want to change that conversation in your school, what are the challenges that you're up against when you're looking at something like Oracy, which isn't a straightforward program you can take off a shelf and shove in somewhere, where it is something which is more complex. What are the kind of challenges that you're facing? So Oracy is everywhere and nowhere. There will be talk in every school. It's no school is silent. You might have silent corridors if you've chosen to go that way. But it's no school is silent. Talk and speaking is part of the teaching. You can't do teaching and learning without talking and listening, which is what Oracy is all about. But the risk is for something like Oracy is because of that, because of its kind of ubiquitous nature, it means that it's quite often sort of left to chance. It's kind of there, it's somewhere in the ether, it's never captured, nobody leads on it, nobody thinks deliberately about it, nobody owns it in the school, nobody's responsible or accountable for it. It is everywhere and nowhere. And those things tend not to get the focus, and you tend not to be able to demonstrate progress. And people find it quite hard to capture what it is specifically that would help to improve. You know, what does good look like? What are we looking for? What are we aiming for? What's our vision around Oracy? In the way that perhaps in other areas that's very either you've captured it in your school or somebody else has told you exactly, you know, what that needs to look like. It's ephemeral, talk's ephemeral, so, you know, unless you've got Iris or one of those systems where you're recording it and you're able to go back and look at it, it's kind of been and gone, and that is a challenge. You know, we've had a real focus on evidence in books and showing exactly what's been done. I think they're becoming less and less. Certainly 8 years ago when I started at Voice 21, everyone talked a lot about, you know, the stamps to say verbal feedback given or verbal, you know, and you know, hopefully they're kind of the sales in those stamps have started to go down. If you're in that industry, I'm sorry. But, you know, that idea that because it's ephemeral, it's kind of valued less. It has less meaning or less value because it's not, you can't go back to it. And also hard to capture and reflect on perhaps in the same way, you know. So unless you've got systems to do that, it's really quite hard to have a conversation with somebody afterwards and really get the nuance. And also there'll be lots of conversations going on in your classroom, and you can't as a teacher necessarily be in all of them. So you'll only see bits of it, or you'll get feedback from it, but it's quite hard sometimes to capture exactly what's going on. There's a lack of currency. There's a lack of currency in our national accountability framework systems around Oracy. You know, beyond the early years, Oracy doesn't have any value in our examination system, our accountability systems, unless you're doing modern foreign languages. You know, so interesting. That's not the case in other countries. Other countries do have a much stronger oral element in their national accountability systems. If you've got any of you do the IB in your school, that has a much stronger focus around Oracy in terms of actually counting towards your final marks than we have in our GCSEs or our A levels. You'll all know that the GCSE spoken language element was taken out in terms of actually counting towards a final grade. It's there it sits on the side, but it doesn't actually count towards the final grade. So, you know, we've had a lot of time where everyone would always argue, yeah, what can be measured gets valued, and I think that's, you know, Oracy struggles from that. You are the model. What I mean by that is that unlike perhaps great literature, where you can point to the, you know, if you're teaching the great works of literature in English literature, you can point to Shakespeare, you can point to, you know, Jane Austen, whoever it is. You don't need to yourself be amazing writer. When it comes to Oracy, the teacher often is the model every day in the classroom, unless you're looking at, you know, Martin Luther King in your speech essay. But on the day-to-day basis, you are the model, and that's quite a lot of pressure. I think teachers can often find that really quite difficult, you know, and it can knock confidence around their own speaking and confidence around their own expression. So, and that's something to think about. Context really matters. It really matters, because Oracy is different in every context. There is and it's very fluid in that basis. And what is true for one setup as good Oracy doesn't apply elsewhere. So we had the conversation earlier. If you look at the early career framework that's just come out, it talks about speaking in full sentences. Is, you know, high quality Oracy, for example, speaking in full sentences. Well, if we're in a bit of exploratory talk where we're discussing an idea in science, for example, it would be really weird for us to all be speaking in full sentences continually. That's not how oral language works. That's not what we do. We bounce off ideas, people build on things, people stutter and start on it in an exploratory talk. It might be relevant in response perhaps to a teacher question, if that's the kind of the culture and the ethos that you've set up in your classroom. So context is really important in that way. It's really important in terms of what children, young people bring into the classroom in terms of their own context and their lives, and what language is, you know, to criticize somebody's language is and the way they speak. Cuts right to identity. You know, it is very, and we've worked with schools before who said, you know, can you do some training for our teaching assistants because, you know, they don't speak properly. And that's certainly something that, you know, we feel really uncomfortable about. And you know, the idea that we need to think about how we can create really high level quality language in the classroom. But that doesn't mean that we start from a position of criticising the language that young people have at home or seeing that as somehow wrong. It's all about context and what's relevant. So how do we enable children to be able to to navigate all of those different contexts they might face and give them the confidence to do that without starting from a point that there's right and wrong around this. And it's relational. Obviously, it isn't something that children can go off and do on their own. The whole nature of it is it's about what they do with each other and what you as a teacher do. And so that's in itself is more complex. There's more layers to that, and it changes continually. I won't go into this in depth because I think you all know, but just I think it's really important. And when we think about it in Voice 21, when we talk about Oracy, we are talking about that coming together of how you learn through talk and how you learn to talk. So when we talk about learning to talk, we're meaning, really how do you develop the skills that you need to be an effective communicator? That might be, how to stand up and do a presentation like I'm doing now. It might equally be learning how to take turns effectively, or how to know when it's your time to speak. And then the learning through talk, how do you create rich contexts and opportunities for children to talk in ways which will develop their thinking and learning around a subject, help them to build their understanding, to negotiate the knowledge between themselves. And we like to think of Oracy as kind of that intersection between it. There will be other organisations have slightly different definitions of it. That's what we go for, and for that we think about it as that ability to articulate ideas, develop understanding and engage with others through spoken language. So, how am I doing for time? Probably, right, because you are going to all be a bit sleepy after. I've got a couple of quick games. I'll do them very quickly, but I think it's important to wake you all up before this afternoon. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of the important good quality professional development is around having really evidence-based frameworks that sit underneath. And so that didn't exist in Oracy. We didn't really have a good articulation of what it is we really mean by it. We might have overall sentences about what it is, but what does that mean if you're trying to teach it? What sits underneath it? So Voice 21 worked with Cambridge University to develop the Oracy framework. It has 4 strands: the cognitive, linguistic, physical, social and emotional strands. And we believe those things all come together to capture what we mean by the domain that is Oracy. Importantly, they don't kind of sit, we call them strands because they're kind of interwoven. They don't sit, you can't really sort of teach the physical strand and then next week we're going to teach the linguistic strand. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But I thought it'd be useful for you to get a bit of unpicking of what I might mean by each one. So I've got 4 games. We might cut it down to 2 because I'm running out of time. So the aim of this is you've got to guess which game best encapsulates which strand of the Oracy framework. Okay. So I'm going to try this whole room. Often I'd break you down into groups, so this could go horribly wrong. But the first game is the 1 to 20 game. I'm sure many of you have played this. Basically, all you have to do as a room is count to 20. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each person, each number has to be said by a different person. You can't set up any rules between you, so you can't have front row says 1, front 2, 3, or anything like that. It's just you've just got to try and find a space to say it when you can. And importantly, if 2 of you speak at the same time, you start back at 1. Wow. So let's see if we've got a high attaining group today. So who's going to instigate? Who's going to start?
1.
Oh. And again.
1.
No, it's 2 next. 1, 2, 3. Oh, 2. Okay. Okay. Let's try again.
1.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh. We'll got to 5. I mean, that's quarter of the way through. We'll leave it there. Okay, so the second game is called If I Ruled the World. So in pairs, one of you is going to start with the sentence stem, if I ruled the world, and you need to finish that off. So if I ruled the world, I would, and it and you have to introduce a rule that you would like to see in the world. So if I ruled the world, I would make it compulsory to eat chocolate every morning for breakfast. And the next person has to say, your partner has to say, I couldn't disagree more. And you have to disagree, and you have to give a reason for why you disagreed. So I couldn't disagree more because your teeth would drop out by lunchtime and we'd have a national obesity epidemic, and we'd all have really bad skin from too much chocolate, etc. So and then you have to introduce, but if I ruled the world, I would. Now the trick on this is trying to be as mean as possible by obviously giving them something that is really hard to disagree with, because they have to disagree, they can't agree. So even if you said, teachers should have a 40% pay rise, they have to disagree. So yeah. Okay, go on, try, turn to your partners, one of you take it. If I ruled the world. And then the third game we won't have time to do, but you all played Articulate before, but you have to describe a word without using the word on a card, and you have to try and get the other person to understand, to guess what the word is. And then which emotion, what I would have done had we had time, was get you to all just say that sentence. We've just had the call. And we'd ask you, in saying that sentence, to channel an emotion, and the aim is that others just guess. So you all say the same sentence, but you could say, we've just had the call. Or you might say, we've just had the call. And you've got to guess what emotion you're conveying. So in doing that, which the 1 to 20 game, which of the element of the framework, which of the 4 strands do you think we were trying to capture there? Yes, exactly. The social emotional, because it's all about how you can read the room, how you know when you've got a chance to speak. Obviously, articulate is a linguistic. All you have is your vocabulary to be able to describe something. The cognitive strand, if I ruled the world, you're obviously having to form an argument, structure an argument against what somebody said. And then the which emotion is actually the physical strand, because all you're using a voice and instrument. You're using the tone of voice. It's the same word you're saying, but you're using that to express it. So the Oracy framework looks something like that. It's available freely everywhere online. Definitely worth having a look at. There's lots of information about what sits behind it. Underneath each of those strands, there's sort of the sub-strands that really describe exactly what we mean by the skills under each one. And we have schools that use it very carefully to plan their Oracy curriculum across all stages and phases of education. And this is, for example, if you are thinking about if you're doing a piece of work, how you might structure it, looking at the different strands where things might sit. But I haven't got time to go into any of that. So, and just to say, this is a quote that I think is really important about when we're talking about Oracy. The focus often is on that expressive side of things. The reason that we focus so heavily on exploratory talk and the dialogic parts of Oracy at Voice 21 is because fundamentally ways of thinking are embedded in ways of using language, and that's again from Neil Mercer. And the way that we structure talk in the classroom, the way that children talk about their learning, the way that they are able to interact around their learning, it isn't just about how they can express it, it's about how they form their understanding of it, and how they're able to develop new ideas around things, how they're able to build up each other, how it's that metacognitive part of talk which is so important. So when we were thinking then, you've got the framework, when we're thinking about what does that mean in the school setting, like how do you change that conversation, what we said is, this isn't something that can just happen by inserting it in. It is about every aspect of school life, and it really gets to the heart of teaching and learning, and what kind of classrooms do you want your classrooms to be. So at Voice 21, having developed the framework for Oracy in terms of what it is in terms of the skills, we developed a set of benchmarks to really say, well, what does this look like in a classroom? And we're really very specific about that we didn't want to have a list of this is what you have to do. They are quite broad ideas that schools can apply into their own context and make sense of based on their ethos and their culture and their curriculum and the things that matter to them. So it really does create that set of shared expectations, which I think are so important for schools to be able to move forward on a complex area like Oracy. and really important, it can't be developed through one singular strategy or intervention. This is really about how you bring things across the whole school and how you pull together all of the different thinking and perspectives that you have in your staff body around what it means in their subject areas. For example, the maths, the talk that you will have in maths will be different to the talk that you may have in history, but there's lots that they can learn from each other around it, and there's a real opportunity to have really rich professional conversations around it. So the Oracy benchmarks look at 5 different areas at a school level. So has the school got an ambitious vision for Oracy? Does it build a culture of Oracy throughout the school? And that might include things like how a parents' evening done. Do you flip them? Do the children actually give a story of their learning to their parent and then be questioned about the teacher, as opposed to the teacher talking about the student while they sit mute? Or your assemblies, somebody like me stood talking to a row of students looking a bit blank? Or are they the collective voice of your school at a particular time where students are talking and discussing the ideas as part of that? Have you got a sustained and wide-ranging curriculum for Oracy? So have you really thought about where Oracy sits within your curriculum? You're not leaving it to chance that it might, that hopefully somebody will catch it, but actually thought about where best to sit. Is it an outcome? Is it an input at different parts? How does it weave its way through? Do you recognise Oracy as central to learning? So is it used as a tool in the classroom to further and deepen and expand learning? And are you accountable as a school to the impact of Oracy? Is it something which is talked about with parents? Do teachers have conversations about where children need to develop in their Oracy? Or is it something that kind of happens but nobody really pays attention as to whether or not anyone's making any progress in it? And at a teacher level, we kind of boiled those down into what we might see at a classroom. So how does that teacher set high expectations for Oracy? Can you see? And if we had more time today, I'd be showing you some videos now where you could really look at, can you see how the teacher's expectations for Oracy are being carried out and what the students are doing? Can you see those students have got used to a certain expectations around Oracy and that enable them to have really high quality conversations without a huge amount of setup because they've been working on it over time? Do they have sort of talk roles and talk guidelines? We'll talk about them in a moment in their classroom. Values every voice, absolutely critical. That this is not about the few children who push themselves up at the front, speaking to everybody else. This is about every voice in that classroom being valued and enabling the conditions that help them to have a voice. And that might mean you being quite strategic about the tools that you use. So we often, with the smaller children, use talk tokens where, for example, a quieter child might be given a token and said, all you need to do in this conversation is use this token. You play it once and speak, or you've got 3 tokens to play, and trying to get them to elaborate on what they've said in the past. Or equally, you might give it to the domineering child and say, you can only use 1 token, so you can only speak once. So you need to think really carefully about when you want to interject and give your view, and not waste that opportunity. Do you teach, is Oracy being taught explicitly? So how can you see where children have actually been taught how to talk well? Is that coming across? And how did students develop their knowledge and understanding through talks, so that harnessing Oracy to elevate learning? And then again, on the kind of assessment side, how are students provided with opportunities to reflect on and improve the Oracy skill? In the best schools that we work with, you go in and the students will tell you, I'm really working on how I can be more audible, and also how I can better develop and elaborate my ideas, because I tend to stop too quickly. Or I'm really working on my listening, so that I'm better able to build on each other's ideas, not just say the thing that I want to say all of the time. We're running rapidly out of time, so I'll whiz through these. Basically, these are just ways of those benchmarks coming to life. So things like discussion guidelines in your classroom, thinking about the structures that you use to enable every child to be able to take part, and the scaffolds that help every child to be able to be part of the conversation in your classroom, and that for them to be listened to, for them to believe that their voice has value because others in the class actually listen to what they say. Loads and loads, obviously, of ways of teaching Oracy explicitly. We could go on all day about the different ways of breaking down that framework and teaching those different aspects, but in a fluid way across the school. How you create really strong dialogue and discussion, exploratory talk in your classroom, so that students understand their accountability to each other in the discussion as well, and are able to back up their answers, are able to think, and how you do that in different subjects and the different type of discussion that you may want to develop. and to elevate learning, and this is really, what are, if you look at Mercer's research around what are the types of important aspects of dialogue that really help to increase attainment, it's that focus on elaboration. So how do we get students to build on and elaborate on their ideas, questioning and querying and challenging each other and the teacher doing the same, and seeing that wide participation of lots of students involved. And that can be facilitated by things like talk tactics, which Voice 21, we encourage schools to use. These are just scaffold ways of getting students to understand the different things that make a good discussion, because that's something perhaps that you have developed naturally as adults, but in classrooms that's often lacking, and means that the discussion becomes very stilted, doesn't move on, doesn't get to the point, goes off track. Having scaffolds like this can really help, and we've got some additional one for teachers. Sorry, it's really hard to read those now on this, but I can send it out if people want copies of all of that. But really thinking about these breaks down the different elements, components that you need in a good discussion, and how, if the students are having a good discussion and you want to help them to move it on as a teacher, how you can, for example, mark good moments so they know that was a really good point. How do you interject, and when's it appropriate for you to do so? And that's an early years version. Again, happy to share. And then around that, appraising progress in Oracy. So we've got lots of tools of how you can do that in a kind of rubric-y type way. We're actually working at the moment on a comparative judgment assessment. So we've done the first 2 pilots of it. It's now working in 100 schools, of being able to get schools to use comparative judgment to be able to track the progress of their students in Oracy using video over time, which is really exciting, because it's the first kind of assessment of Oracy that's scalable at that level, and is actually being able to show for us the progress our schools are making compared to what a year 4 school looks like, a school that Voice 21's been working with for a significant amount of time, compared to a year 1, which previous to this we didn't have a very good way of being able to track. So if anyone's interested in that specifically, then we can send more information. And I think what was really important to me was, how does that then look in terms of if you look into a classroom. So this is a case study from a maths teacher. She was an early careers teacher in a school. She said she had to kind of, if this school had focused really heavily on Oracy, we'd worked with them for some time. She said she had to unlearn a lot of what she'd learned already about what teaching maths meant. With a real big focus on Oracy, it's hard to see there, they've had a massive uptake in their maths SATs results, which they credit to the focus on Oracy. But I think it was exactly the conversations that have happened earlier around how are they able to expose misconceptions? How are they able to go with their students in terms of how they're thinking, not just that listen more, be able to read their classroom more, understand where they need to focus and where they need to spend their time. And she said that focus on like process and efficiency, as opposed to just always getting it right, has really helped to move their school on. So we started at the beginning about saying some of the challenges around Oracy and why it's quite difficult at a professional development level to kind of shift the conversation in your school. What's the opportunity in doing that? Well, and how do you best do that? So I just tried to capture, I think, some of the things that we've learned at Voice 21, working with over 1,000 schools across the country on an extended period of time. So it's been really important for us that we work with schools over multiple years. This is not a quick fix thing. It's something that takes time. And so the first one, be farmers, not florists. This is something that we said at the beginning with Voice 21. We don't want to give schools lesson plans and tools that they can use one day and then wither on the shelf. It's really about how can you give schools the tools to be able to cultivate their own practice. And that's really critical for Oracy. So we use that a lot. Whenever we're tempted, when schools say, just tell us how to do it, they'll say, no, we're farmers, not florists, farmers, not florists. I love florists, there's nothing wrong with floristry, but it was just a good analogy for us to hold on to. Sorry. You need to think about how you scaffold the small steps for teachers as much as for students. So breaking it down, Oracy, we think of as something it's complex and multi-layered. It's not, if you leave it at that level, what happens is people themselves find the things that they think might matter and focus in really closely on those. And you might want to help them to actually not do that, but to think about what steps you want to put in place in your school and from your own starting point. So initially at Voice 21, we had all of our programs very linear. It's like you pass, you did this and then you pass and you then you're in stage 2. And actually we got rid of all of that, because what we found was schools were coming to it at different levels and they understood what was the way that change happened in their school much better than we ever would, and were therefore able to say, well, if in our school, unless we go big on it and, you know, everything's focused around it, then it gets lost. Or if we go too big on it, everyone gets really a bit scared by it and they won't do anything. So we're better off starting in so-and-so's classroom because she's really influential and building it from them. So we found that kind of small steps in the scaffold that happens for teachers is as important as for students. And make it visible and accountable. You know, that's both in terms of visibility literally around the school, you know, put Oracy where you would put everything else. So it's on the displays. It's something which is part of the school calendar. It might be in your assemblies. You know, it's something which is everywhere, but also visible in terms of the accountability. A lot of our schools have it as part of their teacher appraisal. You know, is this, you know, how are you making sure that it's part of that conversation? Embrace the dialogue, and that happens in the, you know, in the staff room as well. Get into this is the meaty stuff of teaching, I think. You know, it's so allow people to spend time talking, thinking about it. There is no right answer, so enable people to have the time to find to discuss it and to get to grips with it. Start at the heart. So what matters in your school, it's going to be much more successful if you start with the things that, so if you're a school which is about inclusivity, think really carefully about, you know, how you value every voice in your school as a starting point, potentially, you know, going through it that way. If you're a school for whom, you know, you're focusing really heavily on how you on the cog science side of things, you might want to focus on, you know, how you use talk to elevate learning in your classroom. So, you know, really try and find the things which really matter to your teachers and your students and start from there. And then when I say welcome the Trojan horse, we've found that having a conversation around something like Oracy in a school and really focusing on it unlocks loads of other professional conversations. It's something which comes back to the reason that a lot of people went into teaching. They care about what their children, young people think. They want them to have a voice in the world. They want them to be confident. They want them to have agency. And having and starting with something like Oracy, people find that it kind of can bring in so many other benefits that they didn't notice or didn't expect it to. So for some of our schools, it's been the mechanism, even in developing middle leaders, for example, because Oracy's been something, for example, which has, you know, it's a new area that somebody can take an early leadership of and cause whole school change. You know, whatever the examples are, sort of see it, I think, embracing all of the different added benefits that can come from focusing on something really deliberately and putting in place that broad conversation around it. And I will stop there because I am over time. Thanks so much. I said at the beginning that I I apologise when I shouldn't. And I'm sorry that I ran over and we didn't get through everything. But if anybody would like to follow up on everything or would like copies of anything, obviously please do get in touch. And if anyone wants to grab me for a conversation or questions, really happy to answer anything. Thank you.